No, never. I'll never feel like I've arrived. I hope to never, ever, ever be complacent, because I think that that's one of the most tragic.
Nobody expected this, not the press, not the fans, not even the court staff, who had grown used to dramatic turns in this case. But when the sealed filing was suddenly unsealed at 9:42 a.m. on a rainy Monday morning, it sent shockwaves through the legal world, because this wasn't just any document. This was the one Blake Lively's legal team had fought tooth and nail to keep buried hidden behind procedural delays, emergency motions, and confidentiality claims, and yet here it was lying in full view on the court record. And when the clerk read the opening paragraph aloud, jaws dropped. The language was clear, the timeline was damning, and the accusation was explosive. Blake Lively had misled the court under oath about the origin, intent, and existence of the smear campaign she accused Justin Baldoni of orchestrating, and for the first time the court had documentation suggesting it was all fabricated. That's when the cameras began to roll again. That's when every journalist at the scene whipped out their phones and started live streaming. Because this wasn't a twist, it was a detonation, and the filing detailed it all: emails, texts, internal memos from Blake's former publicist, who had quietly resigned earlier this year, now turned cooperating witness. And those messages told a very different story, one where the narrative of a powerful woman being targeted unraveled into something much darker, something manufactured, something tactical, because the messages weren't about survival, they were about domination and deception. In one chilling line from a January 2023 email, Blake's rep wrote, "If we leak it first, we control the conversation," and Blake replied, "Let them think he's the villain, they'll believe it." Especially with the right imagery, the right words make it stick. And that was the first crack in the myth, because if she had created the campaign, if she had directed the narrative, then everything she told the court under penalty of perjury was now in question. And suddenly it wasn't just a matter of defamation or reputation, it was a matter of the law. And the reaction from Justin Baldoni's camp was instant, measured but fiery. His attorney stood before the court and delivered a statement that would be replayed on every news channel before sundown. "We were called liars, we were called abusers, we were labeled manipulators. Now the record shows the opposite. Now the court sees what we've seen from day one, a performance and manipulation of truth." And when asked for comment, Blake's team offered none, only a single line: "No comment pending legal advice." And that silence rang louder than anything they could have said, because now even the court was looking into potential sanctions, possible charges, and the reopening of discovery based on willful obstruction of justice. And behind the scenes, everything was shifting. Phone calls were made, meetings canceled, PR contracts suspended, because when the document dropped and the press ran with it, it wasn't just a headline, it was a turning point, and people in the industry started asking questions. Why did she do it? What was she protecting? And how deep did the deception run? Because the filing didn't just expose the lie, it hinted at more redacted sections, notes about digital monitoring campaigns against journalists, influencers, and even other actors who had sided with Justin. And then came the spreadsheet, a list of names, titles, dates, and checkmarks next to actions like freeze out, delay, shadow, response, and target. And the implications were staggering. This wasn't just about Justin. This was about control, about narrative engineering at a scale most people couldn't imagine. And the worst part, the filing revealed that multiple members of Blake's legal and publicity teams had expressed discomfort about the strategy, raising concerns only to be told to stay in line or face consequences. And suddenly, this wasn't just a scandal, it was a conspiracy, one with real-world victims and mounting legal risks. And when court adjourned that day, the courtroom was silent, no shouting, no paparazzi screaming for photos, because everyone there knew they had just seen the start of something massive, something that would redefine careers, destroy alliances, and possibly end a legacy. And outside, Justin stood with his team, eyes tired but clear, and when asked how he felt, he said, "The truth is finally speaking, and that's all we ever wanted." And those words echoed everywhere online, on news tickers and video montages, because after everything, after all the spin, all the accusations, all the silence, the first piece of undeniable proof had finally surfaced, and it changed everything. By noon, the news had reached every major outlet from Los Angeles to London. Headlines screamed betrayal as analysts dissected every line of the unsealed filing word by word, frame by frame. Experts on legal ethics came out of the woodwork to say this wasn't just a mistake. This was perjury, a deliberate lie under oath. And in California, where court deception carries serious consequences, the temperature in the courtroom changed overnight. Because now the case was no longer about a smear campaign. Now it was about the integrity of the judicial process itself, and Blake's team knew a panic began to set in behind closed doors. Her attorneys were seen pacing, clutching thick binders with pages of redactions and annotations, and one senior partner from her firm reportedly walked out of the building that afternoon and never came back. Sources inside the courtroom said a new motion was filed urgently requesting a delay, claiming that the sudden unsealing of the document had created an unfair media spectacle. But the judge denied it in record time, ruling that the public had a right to know the truth, and with that the clock started ticking faster, the public wanted answers. The court demanded action, and for the first time Blake was out of moves. Her silence no longer looked like poise, it looked like guilt, and in the court of public opinion, the shift was brutal. Talk shows that had once praised her for bravery were now questioning every past statement, every interview, every post, because now everything looked suspicious. Even the charity event she spoke at last spring, even the foundation launch, even the carefully curated Instagram videos, all seemed like set pieces in a larger campaign built on fiction. And on social media, people started connecting dots, asking how much of her narrative had been manufactured, and what role others had played in helping her carry it forward. And then Justin's legal team dropped another bombshell, a separate motion requesting that the court unseal all prior depositions and text logs between Blake and her team during the peak months of the alleged smear campaign, arguing that the newly revealed documents proved a pattern of obstruction and false narrative engineering. And once again the court agreed. The judge called it in the interest of justice, and within hours boxes of sealed exhibits were being unpacked and transferred to public record, and what they revealed made the situation exponentially worse for Blake, because the text threads showed that not only did she approve the smear strategy, she also personally approved language to be leaked to friendly journalists under fake names. And when one of her associates warned her that the approach might trigger legal retaliation, Blake reportedly replied, "Let them try, I'll win," in the court of public sympathy. And that single line became the most quoted statement of the year because it exposed everything: the strategy, the arrogance, the belief that no one would dare challenge her in public. And now that illusion was shattered and insider camp fractures began to widen, her lead attorney requested to be removed from the case, citing breakdown of communication. Her publicist went silent, her assistant deactivated her account, and Hollywood watched as the once untouchable star became a legal pariah, because this wasn't just a court loss. It was a full-scale collapse, and the names on the spreadsheet that had previously been redacted started to be leaked too, revealing that multiple influencers and smaller creators had been contacted, pressured, or in some cases offered money to amplify the original false narrative. Some complied unknowingly, others refused, and one even came forward stating she had been threatened with defamation if she ever spoke about the coercion she faced. And the court took notice, because these weren't just tactics, these were acts of manipulation that potentially violated witness tampering and civil intimidation laws. And the judge ordered a special hearing to review all past filings for evidence tampering and perjury, which meant Blake was now staring down not just civil penalties, but possible criminal referrals. And the pressure began to mount. She stopped appearing in public. Her legal team became almost invisible. Her social media went dark, and the once dazzling media persona started to fade, replaced by silence broken only by occasional updates from court clerks and shocked observers, because now the public wanted accountability, and some even called for charges to be filed. And behind the scenes, producers backed out, brands began canceling endorsements, and agencies began rewriting deals because the fallout was no longer theoretical, it was real, measurable, and accelerating. And through it all, Justin kept his distance, issuing only one statement during a press conference outside the courthouse: "We asked for truth, and now it's finding its way forward." And those words resonated not because they were dramatic, but because they were true, and the evidence now spoke louder than any speech. And for the first time since the legal war began, Blake's narrative was no longer holding. The court wasn't protecting her anymore, the press wasn't praising her anymore, and even her closest allies began distancing themselves, hoping to avoid the fallout, because this wasn't just a reputational hit, it was a full-scale implosion, and the worst was yet to come. The courtroom was tense like never before. Cameras clicked wildly outside as a new wave of reporters camped at every corner, because this wasn't a trial anymore, it was a reckoning. And the documents just kept coming, revealing deeper layers to a conspiracy nobody imagined from the outside. What looked like a public feud had transformed into a calculated operation stretching across months, involving secret burner accounts, Encrypted group chats, implanted stories, and now with everything laid bare, the judge called an emergency evidentiary hearing, summoning parties named in the filings and demanding explanations for the blatant discrepancies in testimony. And that morning, Justin Baldoni arrived calm, collected, and flanked by his attorneys, while across the aisle Blake Lively was nowhere to be seen. Instead, her legal team stood alone, visibly shaken and holding folders filled with printed emails, screenshots, and affidavits that would ultimately betray their own client. Because among the most damning discoveries was a thread dated 6 weeks before the original court complaint, where Blake explicitly discussed strategy on how to frame Justin as the aggressor despite having no hard evidence. And in that exchange, her legal advisor wrote, "Are you sure this is the direction you want to go?" To which she replied with a now infamous line, "Make it go viral." That phrase echoed throughout the courtroom as it was read aloud, and gasps rippled through the gallery. Because this wasn't miscommunication, this was intent, and it changed everything legally, morally, publicly. And even the judge couldn't hide the shock as he ordered all future court appearances to be conducted under oath, citing a pattern of misleading behavior by one party. And with that, a new chapter began, because once credibility is gone, everything else falls. And in the days that followed, headlines exploded again. Influencers started publicly retracting past statements. Former colleagues came forward alleging a culture of intimidation and backroom deals. And one high-profile agent even stated off-record that the scandal had undone a decade of goodwill in less than a week. But the worst was the deposition tape leaked by a court staffer and uploaded anonymously before being taken down. It showed Blake refusing to answer direct questions, then nervously looking off camera as if seeking instruction. And when asked if she orchestrated the leak of false information, she said, "I do not recall," a phrase repeated over 50 times, and legal analysts ripped it apart, calling it coached, evasive, and borderline contemptuous. And that clip went viral, drawing millions of views in hours and completely destroying the last shreds of sympathy. And on the streets, fans who once adored her started organizing boycott campaigns. Petitions circulated demanding sponsors drop her name, and studio projects began quietly recasting roles once attached to her. And through it all, Justin Baldoni remained silent, letting the facts do the damage while his team prepared for the civil countersuit that would seek damages not just for defamation, but for loss of reputation, business opportunities, and mental distress. And experts estimated the claim could exceed $20 million depending on the final court findings. And inside Blake's camp, the tension boiled over one of her remaining advisors resigned, citing irreconcilable ethical differences, and a junior staffer allegedly leaked internal memos that showed they were preparing to spin the narrative again. But this time the public wasn't buying it, and the judge issued a gag order preventing either side from speaking to media outside official court statements, signaling how seriously the court now viewed the unfolding chaos. And behind the scenes, a quiet but crucial battle began about settlement, because with the evidence this strong and the backlash this wide, Blake's legal options were vanishing, and rumors spread that a deal was being crafted behind closed doors, one that would prevent criminal referral in exchange for full retraction and public apology. But sources said Justin's camp refused, unwilling to accept anything short of full accountability, and that stunned Hollywood, because settlements were common, expected. But this was different. This was personal. This was about trust being broken in front of the world, and if no deal was reached, the case would go to trial with live testimony, full jury, and international coverage. And insiders whispered that Blake might not survive the witness stand, not because she couldn't speak, but because the documents contradicted everything she had ever said in court, and the risk of perjury charges loomed so large that some wondered if she would flee altogether or face it head-on. And in that moment, her silence became deafening. Every hour she said nothing, more voices spoke out against her, and the narrative shifted from scandal to betrayal, and finally to justice. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted from tense to electric as journalists from around the world now gathered for what was being dubbed the trial of truth, with every new filing revealing deeper cracks in the narrative Blake Lively once controlled. And what started as a quiet smear campaign had evolved into the most explosive celebrity courtroom saga of the decade, because Part 4 of the Unsealed documents painted an even darker picture, connecting the dots between planted media stories, shady PR firms, and shell corporations with anonymous ownership traced back to accounts managed by Blake's inner circle. And the most chilling detail was a draft press release dated months before the lawsuit ever became public. It described Justin Baldoni as manipulative, aggressive, and A danger to women's voices, all allegations never proven, all quotes never verified, and yet they were distributed to multiple online outlets. Weeks before the story was live, and in some cases, those stories went viral thanks to coordinated efforts. Involving burner Twitter accounts, anonymous Instagram tips, and what forensic tech experts called social amplification. Bots designed to make certain stories trend artificially, and in the hearing that followed those findings, a digital forensics expert testified in open court that at least 35 accounts used identical IP patterns, traced to a single device registered under a shell firm owned by a consultant with previous ties to Blake's brand campaign. Now the defense scrambled to object, but the judge overruled it, saying the pattern suggested willful intent to manipulate public perception, and that intent became the cornerstone of the argument from Baldoni's legal team, because they were no longer just proving defamation. They were proving sabotage, and behind the scenes, Blake's team began to crack, according to anonymous sources close to the case. 2 attorneys on our counsel list had already warned her about the risk of criminal exposure, one even stating that continued silence might be interpreted as an admission of guilt, and yet no statement came, not a single post, not a single denial, and the silence grew so loud that former co-stars began publicly distancing themselves. Directors removed her from pending projects, and fashion labels began quietly editing her out of campaigns, and the damage was compounding by the hour. And then came the most unexpected twist. An insider leaked a previously sealed voicemail left by Blake to her attorney just weeks before the court date, where she said, "I don't care what it takes, get this handled. I want him erased, not literally but publicly." And that clip, when authenticated by 2 independent audio specialists, exploded across platforms, making it impossible for her team to walk back the accusation, and suddenly even her most loyal fans began to question everything, because this wasn't miscommunication, this was orchestration, and the filings backed it up with time-stamped communications showing direct instructions from Blake's team to, quote, "find leverage or create it," and that phrase, "find leverage or create," was repeated no less than 4 times in internal memos, suggesting they were not simply reacting to threats but manufacturing them. And all of it was aimed at Justin Baldoni, who remained shockingly composed through it all, releasing only one official statement through his attorney, saying, "We have always believed in the power of truth, and now the truth is speaking louder than anything else." And that quote went viral, framed on posters, memes, t-shirts, even picked up by activist groups fighting online harassment. And the irony was undeniable. The actor, once accused of toxicity, was now being hailed as a voice of strength, while the woman who made her brand on authenticity and female empowerment was being accused of weaponizing the very narrative she once championed. And back in court, the judge ordered all remaining communication records unsealed within 72 hours. And that deadline created a panic inside Blake's legal camp. Sources reported an emergency overnight meeting where options were laid out, including voluntary dismissal, public apology, sealed settlement, or full court battle. And according to one leak, she chose none instead, allegedly stating, "They're not going to bury me that easily. I'm not going anywhere." And that defiance might have made her feel strong for a moment, but the legal reality was now closing in, and one misstep away from criminal indictment for perjury, obstruction, and malicious prosecution. Because if proven that the lawsuit was filed with knowingly false claims, the consequences could extend beyond fines and lawsuits. It could mean disbarment for attorneys, criminal referral for all who participated, and reputational destruction for a lifetime. And by the end of the week, Hollywood was buzzing not about her next film but about her possible arrest. And that is when the final motion hit. Baldoni's legal team filed a request for expedited trial, citing ongoing damages, irreparable harm, and continuous manipulation of media, and the court granted it, setting a trial date just weeks away. And with that one signature, the countdown began to what could become what began as a quiet lawsuit has become the most brutal public unraveling of a carefully curated persona Hollywood has ever seen. The truth is out, the evidence is unsealed, and the mask has fallen. Blake Lively's empire of narrative control, manipulation, and performative innocence has collapsed under the weight of receipts, timelines, and sworn testimony. And no silence, no last-minute spin can undo what the world now knows. This wasn't a smear campaign against her, it was a smear campaign orchestrated by her. And when justice finally spoke, it reminded everyone watching, fame does not mean truth, power does not mean integrity, and no matter how loud the lie, the truth waits, and when it arrives, it echoes louder than any PR machine ever could, because in the end, what mattered wasn't the illusion, it was the reckoning. And now it's here, and it's real, and it's unsealed.